Hello, welcome to a very brief introduction to comments and docstrings. These are not going to be all of the things that you need to know about comments and docstrings, but they're going to be a good starting point, and they'll get you started in your Python class or maybe in an industrial setting. So I have here a Python file. I'm just going to hit run to demonstrate that this actually does something. All it does currently is print out hello. So we're going to write some docstrings for this. So first things first, a docstring comes at the beginning of something. In this case, it's coming at the beginning of a file. So the way you make a docstring is you put 3 sets of double quotes, and then you can type something in here. So I'm going to type, this is a brief introduction to docstrings and comments. Okay, you'll note that's a full sentence. It's got a period at the end. It's got a capital letter starting it. That's good practice. Things should be readable. If you're wondering where I'm getting standards for these things, I'm getting standards from these things for, I'm getting standards for commenting and docstrings from PEP 8 and PEP 257. So PEPs are Python enhancement protocols. These are they're not critical to the way that the code works, but they're philosophical statements about the way code ought to be written or ought to work. Think about these as they're not quite a style guide. They're more of a philosophical document, but they do include some style stuff. So I encourage you to read through PEP 8. We're going to try to use it in the class that you're taking from me. So this is going to be it's a long read, but we'll talk about it a fair bit. So important things I'd say to get started with. I'd read the introduction here. I'd read this thing about foolish consistency. And then I'd scroll down a bit, and I'd probably read naming conventions and comments. And then if you want to read PEP 257, it's pretty short. I would really recommend that you just read the barest bit of it right now. It talks a lot about docstrings for functions, and we're not really writing functions as yet in our code. So we'll get to this later. When we get to functions, remember to go back and read some of this. You'll note that right now I'm following this one-line convention for my docstring. Now, my docstring in this case is a little bit short, really. So when you turn in anything to me, I'm going to ask that you include a docstring at the top that's a little bit longer than this. So in order to make a multi-line docstring, I prefer to have the whole thing isolated. You'll see some conventions where they'll put things like this. I really prefer to just have that line on its own. And then and then stylistically, you should have a blank line. And then here you can put a longer description. So I'm going to write that longer description now. I'm going to say, I'm going to pause this and write a longer description. Okay, so I've written out a slightly longer I've written out a slightly longer statement here. That this is an introduction to using docstrings and comments for Joe's computer science classes. Please follow the formatting here and the advice given in the associated video. For more information and further reading, refer to PEP 8 and PEP 257. You'll note something here if you're paying attention to my line count. I'm out on column 133, so I'm past the character count. So I really should be kind of breaking those lines out a bit more. This is one of the things that's in PEP 8, is not to make your lines too long. PEP 8 suggests 79 characters. I find that to be a bit too limiting, so I usually cut mine at like 120 or something. We'll talk about it further in the semester. Just maybe keep an eye on it. All right, so I've got my docstring for my initial thing. If you're turning something in for class, I really want this to include your name. So this is a brief introduction to docstrings and comments written by Joe. If you wanted to include more stuff, like if you're resistant to using GitHub for version control or something, you might include a list of revisions that have been made to this thing or when it was created, something like that. You'll see in a number of my videos I do that. This one I'm not going to because I'm intending to push this to GitHub later for you guys to look at. Okay, and then I've got my print hello here. So when I'm commenting code, initially in the class, I'm going to ask you to comment essentially every line. I know that gets really obnoxious. Don't worry, I'm going to relax that a bit to the point where you can comment a bit less. But you should be writing comments. I'm going to write this comment in a way, in two different ways. So first, I'm going to write what I would call the first pass low content comment. So a first pass low content comment might be something along the lines of call the print function on the string hello. You'll notice that this is going to cause some errors in the code. That's because I haven't included a comment character here. If you're writing in VS Code, you can add a comment character by hitting Control/. And that'll put this little dude, which you might know as a hashtag or an octothorpe, depending on how old you are. If you're from the Middle Ages, octothorpe will be the word you'll use. If you're like a more modern human, you're probably calling that a hashtag. If you're, I don't know, if you grew up in the age of telephone calls, you might call, or like rotary phones, you might call that a pound. Anyway. Point is, I got this space character here between my comment character, so that's the octothorpe or hashtag or whatever, and then the rest of the sentence has this space. We should probably put a period because encourage readability, basically. This is what I would call not the greatest comment. Why is this here is a much better thing than commenting out blow by blow what the computer is doing when it interprets the code. So a more why is this here comment might be something like demonstrate the code is working by printing something. Right, that's a more philosophical, like, why is this line in the code at all, as opposed to this second one, which is much more like, what is it exactly that you're doing? Docstrings should only come at the beginnings of things. So in this case, where I'm writing a couple of lines about this, I'm still using these hashtags or octothorpes, and this is something called a block comment. So the difference is this guy's a docstring, that comes at the beginning of something, that tells us about what that thing is or does. These guys are a block comment. These come before a line of code or a couple lines of code or several lines of code, and they tell me what that little chunk of code does. I know that's a slightly weird distinction. It's going to make more sense if I tell you the following. Docstrings will come up as tooltips. So when I hover print here, I get this stuff. This whole business here is the docstring that's in the print function. So when we're making a tooltip, right, that's where our docstring comes in handy. That's a more philosophical thing or something about arguments, whereas these guys are just for debugging later or helping you adapt your code if you have to come back and refactor it. Those are, so regular comments, these green ones, are much more like, how do I fix this file? Whereas a docstring is going to be much more like, how do I use this file? Okay, so next, there's another comment thing that you can do called a trailing comment. My advice to you is don't do this. Trailing comments basically look like trash. I think they make your code less readable, and one of our goals of writing code is to make readable code. If I wanted to make unreadable code, I'd have an AI do it. So since I'm asking you to generate readable code, I think we should avoid trailing comments. Um, they're generally really gross. They also tend to kick you over the character count for lines. So just don't, would be my advice. I think that's probably what I want you to have for Docstrings and comments today. If you want a more in-depth discussion with some more serious rules, please refer to PEP 8 and PEP 257 and actually give them a quick read. Thank you guys. I will see you on the next topic.